Welcome to 8 and 9 Figure Mentors, the podcast that helps you get to know the people who've started, run, and exited 8, 9, and 10 figure businesses. My name's Tim Cameron Kitchen. I'm the founder of Exposure Ninja and building a group of companies over at Shinobi Capital. And in this episode, I'm joined by Jeremy Lessaris. Jeremy is a purebred entrepreneur, like a proper ideasy entrepreneur. He's started in the region of 50 different businesses and had 8 exits. And these are businesses in completely different spaces. So from like furniture retail to healthcare companies to a design agency, a company that manufactures GPS speed regulators for speedboats pulling wakeboards. Like, he can turn his hand to almost anything, and he talks about this being one of his superpowers. In this episode, we talk about a whole bunch of stuff, including his approach to starting all these businesses, why he's a starter rather than an operator, the fact that, get this, he's done most of this whilst also holding down a really high-powered corporate job, and the trade-offs and the work ethic that he's had to have in order to be able to do that. And he's really honest about some of the sacrifices that he's made and how he feels about those sacrifices looking back. We also talk about starting a business using bootstraps or whether to raise investment early on, and some of the pros and cons and his advice to businesses that are considering raising. As well as as he's gone through his career, he's sort of changed his focus, and he's a lot more impact focused than just being purely financially driven. So he's now running a commercial real estate company that's very sort of mission driven and has a goal to build 1 million houses as well with one of his other companies. So an absolutely fascinating guy, unlimited horizons for him, really, really impressive. I hope you enjoy this episode with Jeremy Lessaris. Jeremy, welcome to 8 and 9 Figure Mentors. We're going to explore some of the key decisions and events from your life to understand what makes you tick and how you approach the world. You ready?
I'm ready. Super excited to see you today.
Amazing. So I think let's go right back to the start. You started your first business pretty early, didn't you? Could you talk us through how you first fell in love with the world of entrepreneurship?
My father, he was a serial entrepreneur himself. I think most of the companies he got involved in were a flop, but he had a car wash, like a small garage where he cleaned cars. And I started by cleaning cars, and I'd make, a quarter or 50 cents or something to help him vacuum or whatever it was. And I immediately got a taste of, running a company because I saw my mother and father together. They owned a small company called DJ's High Tech Auto in the suburbs of Chicago. And one summer I decided I wanted a lemonade stand. They had these like building blocks, but they were life-sized. I don't remember the name of them. I wrote an article about this later on. It's actually on my website. And I wanted those so bad so that I could build a lemonade stand. And so the lemonade stand turned into a really full-fledged business. I printed brochures from their Xerox machine. I went next door to the construction sites and passed these things out. And, I think some of it was sympathy. They lined up, but it went from lemonade to hot dogs to a pizza oven to a microwave with, microwavable foods. I got shut down by the health department. So I learned right away, like regulatory and compliance things. There was a hot dog stand down the street in Palos Hills, Illinois, that I think was probably losing their lunchtime business because I had set up shop, and it was great. It was fun. I made $3,000 that summer. I was 6. So to do that was like, okay, I get it. Now, mind you, my father wrote down, okay, you owe me, I'm going to borrow you this money, but then you owe me plus interest. I didn't know anything of what I was doing. So I got the bug early on. My next business was the better of the learning experiences, which was a complete failure. I took that $3,000. I bought an arcade game, a full-size, arcade game, and I put it in the garage thinking, I'd have a line of kids that would show up and put quarters in it. Failed. And fast forward, I ended up having to give that thing away. I don't even know where it ended up. Yeah, I lost all that money. So it was a good experience early on, and I had the bug. It began from there, and everything was looking at it from an angle of, how is this a business? How do I make money doing it? And that was kind of the early phases of my entrepreneurship. Fast forward into, today, all of the steps along the way, I think I started looking at things as a business too much and less about the passion of what I wanted to do and my lifestyle. So more recently, I've changed direction of passion focused business development and lifestyle design, not business design for the sake of profit, profit and profit.
Mm.
So things have changed significantly, but I go back to my roots, which is, I grew up in a very rough scenario and didn't have housing, lived in a car at some point for a while. My father made it okay. He did the best with what he had. And now I'm focused on trying to bring affordable real estate to market using crowdfunding applications that I'm building. I'm trying to help people who can't get loans and get on the property ladder. And I'm putting money back into small businesses' pockets because I felt it as I was growing my companies, some of the hurdles. So all of my businesses now, all of the things I'm focused on, invest.co, lenders.co, payment brokers, it's all about giving back to
Mm.
the roots of where I started. So it's a 360 going back to like, where did I come from and how did this whole thing start?
That's awesome. I want to come back to that idea of sort of changing direction as you've gone, and your focus now on sort of impact and more purpose. But it sounds like the entrepreneur bug, it only sort of increased its hold over you. You've had 8 exits, is that right?
That's correct.
This
Some
is
I
wild.
think it's funny when people say how many, because they're not always great.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's out of necessity that you have to exit a company. So when it's a great number to say have had 8 exits, like some of those were not happy exits.
Yeah.
Some of them were necessity exits because I couldn't afford to maintain it or build it or grow it. Meanwhile, they were the right time. I got lucky. I found the right people, some amazingly talented operators in areas where I don't have the skill set were able to step in and took many of those companies and made them unbelievable.
Mm.
Even the more recent one, Design Co. by an operator company called Core, they're amazing. Like they're building software, more SaaS companies, more systems and infrastructure to support small business. And Design Co. was a direct plug into what they're doing. So it's an amazing partnership. And he was involved in iReview, which was one previous. So when you say 8 exits, it sounds good. Some of them were amazing. Some of them were not so good.
Yeah, of course. There's always a percentage that have to just be sort of taken out the back and shot. But I guess
It's a good way to look at
to
it.
have 8 exits, you must have had 8 plus N entries, right? And how many businesses would you say that you started over the years? And then I guess also, what do you think your success rate is of all of the ones that you start? How many go on to do something that you're proud of?
I mean, that percentage is increasing because I know what I'm doing now. I don't know how many I've started. I mean, I've actually never sat down and wrote the number out, but it's probably north of 50.
Wow.
And, and when I say 50, like there's an idea, I get past ideation, I start investing a little bit of money into it. Maybe it gets to revenue right away, maybe it doesn't. And then sometimes like pivot now, you start really getting into the devil of the details and you find out how heavy of a lift it is. One of them is a great example, Minimosa. I still want to do this, but it's just such a massive undertaking. We designed a valve that separates pressurized liquid from flat liquid. The goal of it was to make a single serving mimosa, a mechanical beverage technology that hasn't been done in decades. There's only been one or two other patents applied for. When I got down the path of how much expense there is in starting a beverage company, let alone alcohol, even make it much more difficult in a effervescent liquid arena. So if you're in the sparkling wines, it's just a Herculean effort to get it off the ground and takes 60 to 80 million dollars just to, get it to market. And we were given advice early on to go raise capital. And I'm not a big fan. I like to get things to revenue in a bootstrap fashion to see where the pitfalls are before I bring in investment capital, plus valuations are better. So you end up owning more of the company. I just I couldn't take it on. So, we sunset that project. It was fun. I loved it. Everybody was gung ho about it. I think we did a great job in terms of the ideation, but once you got to that number, it was dead. So there's so many of those that I've gotten to that point. More recently, I think because of the passion-led, purpose-driven organization uh, ideas, it's very different because there is much more to having a passion about a business than building a business for profit's sake and being focused on numbers. Most of the successful startups I've seen, they're passion driven. You find these founders who are willing to bleed for their company to a degree that money doesn't really matter until they need to raise capital. Then it's a different discussion. But you can see them in the reason why VCs and PE firms and others invest in them. They're investing in the people. So I see that a lot now in the way I operate the things I want to build now, which is I have passion behind it. There's purpose. And those two things really drive the success rate up rather than like, hey, this is a great idea and I think it can make a lot of money.
It's really interesting. I mean, you've been in such a variety of different businesses, haven't you? Like furniture retail, maybe a couple of healthcares. There's a speed regulator for wakeboarding boats. Like I've never, and you're talking about these mimosas. I've never met a design agency. I've never met anyone who I guess has had businesses in such a variety of different spaces. And you clearly need to go deep enough in any one of these areas to, your speed regulator for wakeboarding boats is like industry standard, right? This is something that's out there on loads of boats. Like it's no joke to start something like that. Like what is it about you that has allowed you to go into so many different areas like this?
Other talented people. So I think I get dragged into things where other people have expertise and are willing to mentor and train. And you also have to understand that most of these companies were started while I had a career. So I always had a fallback job, so to speak. And I was the king of side hustle. So while I had a career, I was able to do these things because there was an allowance of that in that organization when it was young, before it went public, that I had the freedom to do those things and was coached and mentored by some amazing people. So it was really good for me. But also, I would say the thing, not that I regret, but that I didn't have an industry specific focus, because if all of that energy was put into one thing, maybe I would have had a totally different outcome. But it's just a question of, I kind of like the diversity, and it's given me so many different insights on different topics. And I've seen different angles of revenue structure and operations, from really human capital intensive businesses to fully automated businesses, from point of purchase or single point of purchase sale and product sale with inventory businesses to SaaS companies with recurring revenue. So I've gotten to see all different flavors of companies that give me direction on what I want to build moving forward. So it was helpful from that perspective, but I feel like maybe there was a missed opportunity to have a focus in an industry and be extremely well known for that specific business. But I kind of like the diversity myself because I get bored really easily, as you can obviously see.
I mean, I want to ask about work ethic because, starting this number of companies, I think most people who are listening would just, the energy that's required to start any business, no matter, probably the energy to start something is pretty much about as high as it gets, or maybe when it starts to get early traction is about as high as it gets. To do this number of things whilst also having, like you say, a career, and this was a job that wasn't like a chilled out job, right? There was a
No.
lot of travel involved. This was this was a full-time plus job, and then you're doing all of these other things. What is your work ethic like, and what drives that?
I think early on, my work ethic stemmed from a survivalist mentality. So going from the area where I grew up, living in squalor, for lack of a better word, in a bad neighborhood, hopping from parent to parent, it was a survivalist mentality really early. And that's not really a good way to start things.
Mm.
I got a mentor early on in my 20s who really changed directionally how I thought about what I was doing, because I was doing good things, but I was focused on it the wrong way. I was just trying to survive. So I got up early because my father indoctrinated me with early bird gets the worm, and he would wake me up Saturday and Sunday at the same time, 6 a.m., get up. My stepfather similarly was very driven to do chores at 6 a.m., blasting music to wake everybody up. So I got this like get up early and get things done. And then it stayed with me because I think the passion started coming because I saw some results from it.
Mm.
So the work ethic came from survivalist to the rewards were there because I was the first person up. So I still to this day, and my friends think I'm crazy, I get up at 5:30, sometimes 5 a.m. And I'm, very dedicated to jumping right into things. And I'm a morning person. I hate
Mm.
saying that because I don't think there's a such thing as a morning or a night person, but I recognize my strength was first thing in the morning, get as much done as possible. And my routine has gotten better and better from that perspective. So, so I think the work ethic came from that. And then working my way from a marketing guy to the global vice president of marketing for a publicly traded multi-billion dollar manufacturing group, that was blood, sweat, and tears and a ton of sacrifice, not
Mm.
work ethic.
Mm.
I sacrificed friendships. I sacrificed going out and partying and doing all the things that I should have done in those early years of my career. I gave all of that up. I moved far away from the neighborhoods I grew up in. And so all of my friends were kind of far, and it was really just focus on work. And then once I started, developing and getting into computers and how things worked and building applications and understanding how I can do it, I think I got a little bit obsessive in business and didn't have a balanced life.
Mm.
So I don't promote this survivalist mentality of bleed it out until you get like you should drive, you should be so driven and do it. I don't think that's a healthy way because I sacrificed health, I
Mm.
sacrificed family and friendships and anything I could to hit that success that I wanted to see. And today I don't have the deep long-term friendships. I still do. I have some amazing friends that stuck through it regardless, but they saw it too, like I wasn't available. So I turned off everything else to have the success. And then now I'm going back trying to repair it all. So I think there's phases to this, like what's the ethic? I don't know that that's ethics. I think
Mm.
that's a little bit of obsession to get to a specific point, but too much is never enough when you're in that mentality. You just keep
Mm.
you're like, okay, there's another hurdle. There's always a bigger boat.
Yeah.
So you're like, okay, I'm here, but I want to get to the next phase. How much more can I put in, and what else can I sacrifice? Now it's more about balance. So now I'm starting to see, I wish I would have done things differently, and maybe I could have grown more organically and not so brute force. But I also think it was valuable in the path that I went down to be at where I'm at today.
Mm.
So I'm grateful that I did it the way I did it. I wouldn't, trade it for the world, but I definitely think there's a healthier way than just work all the time. So
Mm.
I try to promote that as much as I can. I know it's hard because if you are passionate founder and you're like, this is the thing that I want to do so bad, if it's for the right reasons, it's great.
Mm.
But if it's just a money focus or a survivalist mentality, it's not healthy at all.
Yeah. I think the money focus thing is interesting because I've spoken to a few people on this podcast who have said the the money focus thing is almost an illusion because the further you get, the more you realize, oh, there's further to go, and you're forever chasing the horizon. Has that been your experience as well, or
Always.
yeah?
It's, I think the more money you make, the more needs there are to be met. The
Mm,
bigger the company, the more it burns money. I mean,
mm,
it's a chase, but I also think people don't look at the valuation of their organization, which is something that I learned early on, which is why I have so many exits, because I recognized I don't want to be a day-to-day operator. The value in what I do, and this is just for me, this isn't everybody. I recognized that I could build things faster because I had done it so many times and I had a template of how to get things up and running into revenue and profitability, that somebody had more value in that at 4 or 6 times the earnings that I would get in a year. So I could fast forward time and not have to operate the company for 4 to 6 or 10x
mm,
on the multiple of your earnings. When I recognized that, I said I can build a company and get it up to revenue and profitability in 18 to 24 months. There's probably a fairly decent exit attached to that. Why would I operate it for 4 years? That
mm,
was just my mentality younger. So
mm,
I think that's also why I had so many exits and got into so many other things and were operating multiple companies simultaneously because I had a bunch of irons in the fire to try to figure out the best path. I don't think that bleeding your startup to have an income is healthy, which is why I always had a side hustle, because I didn't want to raise capital.
mm,
I don't think it's bad to raise capital. I just think it's a landmine field that you have to get through if you're going to get capital from the right people that are actually synergistic and helpful for the organization and aren't predatory. There's
mm,
tons of organizations that do it. I just worry that startups, especially founders who have one idea, they give it away to
mm,
raise capital too soon because they need money personally.
mm,
And it's either that or they bleed their startup and it fails. So, in terms of like best practices for, you know, chasing the horizon of how much money you're going to make, you have to look at the longer term play. If you're going to be the operator, you need to focus on the bottom line. Everybody is top line focused. More and more I talk to founders like, yeah, we did $1 million a month MRR. I'm like, don't care. Well, is it profitable? Well, no, we're burning like, our runway is X and we're burning X. Is like, okay, that's a terrible business. Not that you can't, have companies that are not profitable that are super valuable. I mean, look at
mm.
Amazon. They didn't make profit forever. I mean, forever. But
Yeah,
that's a much bigger game to play with a
yeah,
lot of moving parts and I think almost more stress than it's worth. But at the end of the day, there is no horizon of I'm going to make more money or this is how much value it is. You just have to be passionate about it and build something that has a lifestyle attached to it versus, hey, I'm building this just to make money and that's all I care about. Because I think everybody's just trying to leave their job, like especially side hustle businesses. If you're bootstrapped and you're like, hey, I have a job, I can't wait to leave this job. I want to go do this thing full time.
mm,
People pull the plug way too early and they end up bleeding their startup to a point where they don't survive. Hopefully that somebody can hear this and say, okay, I need a little bit more time, a little bit more profitability, a little bit more stability. Don't look at revenue, look at like grow from the bottom up. Don't grow
mm,
from the top down. Sales does help. Don't get me wrong. Sales cures a lot of things, but profitability is way more important, especially early on, because if it can self sustain, then it may be able to sustain you in your job because you're still an
mm,
employee of your own company.
mm.
So I think that would be helpful. I wish I heard that much earlier on.
Yeah, that's a great shout. I was with a CFO of a public company, and they'd done a few acquisitions over the years, and then they sold mid 9 figures. And it was really interesting when he was talking about the companies that they'd acquired. Most people would talk about them as this was a $50 million company, or this is a 40, talking about top line. But he always referred to their EBITDA, and he would be like, this is a 500,000 company, or this was a 600,000 company. Whilst on the surface, it sounds a lot less impressive to be talking about that. The reality is all of the valuations were based on the bottom line. So actually that was the number that was most relevant to him. And it completely changed my habit around this. And I think it takes a lot more discipline to look at businesses in terms of their bottom line, doesn't it? Because you don't get carried away. You don't get so emotional about the vanity of the top line growth. You're rooted in the practicality of, okay, but what's actually left at the end? He was like, revenue is an input. I don't care about the
100% agree with that statement. And it's only one of the inputs. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I'm at the end of the show, I'm going to send you a hat that says EBITDA, because it is. There actually is one online. I love it.
It's your business, right?
No, I don't need any more. That's another business I don't want to start. I learned early on that that's part of it. I mean, if you look at discretionary earnings too, depending on how big these companies are, if you take out non-reoccurring expenses, because some companies just fiscally irresponsible. So there has to be some look at how are they operating to get to that number. And operationally, there's probably a ton of things that could be harmonized to reduce expenses. It's one of the companies I started, Payment Brokers, specifically around cost reduction exercises. Not necessarily payments, but cost reduction as a whole. So there's operational efficiencies, and then you take out a bunch of the NRE, because once you take that out, then you can really see, like, what is this really worth as it stands today? Is it sustainable without all this expense? Maybe there's a really good business under that you just don't see because they're just, frivolous about how they spend, and they don't really pay attention to it, which is what I see a lot in the medical professions and SaaS specifically. Everyone, well, we need this software too. Well, we need this operational tool, and everything's now a subscription. So
yeah.
Everybody got the model. I think we got it. But everything's a subscription, and it just plus and another plus and another. It's like, well, we need this tool for operations, and then we need this project management software, and then we need this thing to help the project management software. It's like, I get it. Is it really functional? And are there things that can be looked at to reduce it so that EBITDA is worthy? So even if it doesn't look great, sometimes it's just a matter of some scrutiny, and you got to, roll your sleeves up and get into the day-to-day operations to see where there is money to be made. But still, the most important input is sales. Most of my companies, I had sales before I had product.
Right.
Whether it's to test the market, whether it was, listen, it's beta, it's going to launch soon. We need credit card numbers prior if you want to be part of that first wave of people that have access. I was always revenue first before I did anything drastic, because it was my own money. So being a bootstrap founder is very different in terms of how you get to profitability, because it matters day one. And so my claim to fame with a lot of my startups were, we were profitable within 6 months, most of them. Minimally, but profitable. Now, I say that while I didn't often take a salary, so that's not really a great judge of, is it profitable or not profitable? I mean, to put in management in place and still be profitable, would it have been still profitable? So those are the things you have to look at. And I think more companies should just focus on bottom up. There's a really good business case of this. And I think it was not Campfire. I can't remember the name. It was a CRM company. The CEO is very well known to slow grow and was really bottom line focused day one. Didn't make major changes. And that became like a really common, not necessarily CRM, but project management software. I think it was called Campfire. I can't remember.
Yeah. Okay.
Really great podcast with him, specifically talking about bottom up growth. That's where everybody should be focused.
It feels like there's two types of businesses in the world, aren't there? There are the Ubers where you just have to dominate the market as quickly as possible, hope that Massa invests in you so that you can get that dominance, and then you worry about profitability later. And then there are the I guess the real businesses, and the danger is that startups today. I had someone message me on on LinkedIn asking about investment in their early stage startup. And this was a business that should have been aiming for profitability from day one. There's absolutely no reason not to. But their stage one to starting a business was to go and find investment. And it's almost like they've read all the articles, the interviews, Uber, Jeff Bezos, all of this, and there's like an assumption that if I'm going to start a business, first thing I need to do is raise money. They're not looking at, the idea of bootstrapping is some sort of quaint, old-fashioned, cutesy concept for people from the olden days. But I think, like you say, if you, I've always thought of it as maybe like an airplane's nose. As long as you're profitable, the airplane's nose is pointing up. It doesn't have to be much, but as soon as you're unprofitable, the airplane's nose is pointing down, and the clock is ticking. And when the clock is ticking, you've got the pressure, and you can't think clearly when you're under huge amounts of sort of survivalist pressure. Whereas as long as you're at least break even, you've got space, you've got time to think. You don't have to panic, and you can build in a more, I guess, sustained way. But it feels like that's a message that's not the conventional wisdom at the moment.
Well, when you talk about Uber and some of these, unicorns, if it's transformational or disruptive and it needs that kind of fuel, I get it. I'm not saying don't go raise money. And I think every founder thinks I have, what I'm building is transformational and disruptive and it's going to take over. I think everybody wants to believe that. So prove it. Go do a study, put up a landing page and find out how many signups you would get. I think in general, there's a lot less data because you can go by a report versus actually going out and testing the market. So go do that and tell me I had 25,000 people sign up for this thing that doesn't exist. Okay, maybe you should go raise capital.
Yeah.
I get that. Well, I don't want to put my idea out there. It's like,
if you've got that proof of concept, won't you?
Super easy, simple thing you can do to go test. Like say beta 1, invite only. I mean, you know how many splash pages I've seen? It's like email invitations only. They want to see how many people really want access to this type of thing, and they soft market it in a way that doesn't give away too much IP. But if you had and everybody says, well, I don't want my competitors to find out, or somebody's going to do my idea first. That doesn't really matter. If you're focused on what you believe is the best version of what you can build, put out enough to garner interest and then take that and go raise capital. Like that's a very different discussion to have with an investor. I have 50,000 signups. I would invest in that in a heartbeat. Like, sure, that's a great like there's obviously a market for this. You already have, and put pricing out and test that. So, there's product market fit, right? Everybody talks about that. I think there's messaging fit. There's a whole nother section for, spending time on that messaging piece of it. But that's one business. I think there's a micro business within every company. That could be selling an ebook about how things work in that space. It could be anything to bootstrap your way to the first version of what you need. Right. And so I wish more founders would take a step back and say, it's going to take a little bit longer and I have to kind of shift my focus, but that's going to be the history of your business anyway, because you're going to launch. I don't know how many people I need to raise capital for an idea. We're going to spend that money. And then I would ask them like, well, where are you going to spend the money? Well, I need a $200,000 a year salary. And then it's like, okay, I got it. Like immediately got it. So I need to hire these people, my buddy who's a developer for $300,000 a year. And you can see where the money's gone in 6 months. So bootstrap environment, totally different animal. I wish people would focus more on just get a version up, get a splash page up and test the market. Those things will help you go raise capital if that's really what you need to do. Or do what I did. Have a job, take whatever money you have in excess, maybe live within your means, and take the excess and invest it in yourself because you believe in it that bad, which is what I did for forever. And then there was a point where it's like, I can still do my job and build these things. Why would I even stop doing that?
Yeah.
I have that kind of multidisciplinary ability. Not everybody can do that. Maybe I have really severe ADD. I don't know.
You may have discovered a new hyper-powered variant.
I swear I just saw a study yesterday about entrepreneurs having ADD. I wish I could look that up and tell you what the number was, but I think it's a fairly large percentage. Just can't keep focused because that's what we have to do all day. You're firefighting this and you're trying to figure out something else and you're trying to help revenue and you're a sales guy and here's your QuickBooks and now you have a meeting with your accountant to try to figure out how much tax you owe. I mean, you're going to have to wear a million hats. So get used to having, very short attention span.
Yeah, even if you didn't have ADHD at the start, maybe you might develop it as a sort of coping mechanism, perhaps.
But I think as you become a more mature organization, you find your place and where that fits. And I think once you get there, it's a different animal when you don't have to do a million things and get padded as the organization matures in those areas. And if you have great people, that's everything. So I would say it's a people business, even if it's not a people business.
Yeah, that's great advice. Interestingly, when Exposure Ninja got a bit stable and things started breaking, that's when I got bored and put in place a senior leadership team and CEO. And I remember you saying earlier that you're a starter rather than a sort of a long-term operator. So how did you discover that?
Well, I mean, there are things I like to do, and then there are things I don't like to do. And I think that was the first thing when I had to fire someone. I was like, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. It sucks. It's part of the business. But then I was like, can't we get somebody in HR to No, that wasn't it. I actually was, I owned a alternative healthcare, was a drop shipper of natural health products. And so not drop ship retail, we sold business to business, and we were kind of like vendor managed inventory. We would take huge inventory and then we would ship to smaller mom and pop retailers, smaller volumes that they could handle. And so shipping became an absolute nightmare for me because it started in my basement and then it went to a warehouse, and then it was like going into the warehouse and going through and doing inventory. And I was like, wait a second, time out. This is not the best use of my time. And then the question bounced back, like, what is the best use of your time? So I started trying to identify the things that I like to do, one, because, it's stressful enough doing all of the rest of it. And two, operationally, I knew where my strengths were, which was trying to direct the organization and chief of staff in terms of finding talented people. Those are great skill sets that I found early on. And as I grew in the companies that I had or was involved in, I was more of a strategic thinker. I knew the mechanics of getting to revenue and profitability. Beyond that, it was like daily operational recurring things. I don't like that. So I knew I needed to get myself as far away from that as possible, but that is running a business. I mean, it's a machine. It starts moving and then you have to keep it moving. So the day-to-day operational monotony, I couldn't do. So I cut myself from that early on. And then it was like someone else is already operating this company. Now we just make the same amount of money doing the same thing over and over and over, maybe with some slight growth. Like when you get to some level of maturity, growth, 20% year over year growth doesn't happen forever. I mean, when I worked for the engine manufacturing companies, that actually did happen for 10 years, year after year after year. It was an amazing ride. But there was a point where you hit a ceiling. And when you hit that ceiling, if you don't recognize that right away, it's challenging because you'll keep spending to the growth, you'll keep operating to the growth, you'll keep expanding all of the people to the growth, and you'll fail. So being able to scale up and down and do those things isn't something I wanted to be involved in. And I knew an operator, and I've met very few people who love to operate companies, but the ones that do, they're amazing. I just more recently met one absolutely phenomenal operator that runs a multi-million dollar roofing company, California. I don't know how he does daily operations for that level of people that he has to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Not my skill set. So I learned, hey, look, I'm good at this portion, and then the exit. I like the M&A side of it, the exit. It's fun for me. I don't think it's fun for everybody else.
No. That's interesting, because when I was going through the sort of inner turmoil of I don't think that I'm the right person to lead this company anymore, I was facing a bit of a battle with, or maybe this is just the next set of skills that I need to develop to improve myself. How do you decide that, do you know what, this is just an area that I don't want to go in and I'm never going to be good at it, versus this is just something that I need to learn. And if I could learn this, I'd go to the next level. Because we can all look at Mark Zuckerberg, who took it from idea and then is still the leader of the company. And we're like, oh, do we do that? Or do we just sort of build it and then hand it off? I think there's not so many sort of successful case studies of the second part, even though I completely agree with you that I think this is the right the right option for a lot of businesses. But how do you sort of navigate that doubt of, well, maybe I just need to learn how to do this?
Do you want to learn it? I mean, look, there's a point where you get to make a decision about what you want next in life. So does it fit into your design of how you want your life to play out? What does the next chapter of your book look like? Are you this amazing operator forever? Is that how that chapter continues? Or is it for yourself? This is the point where I made a change in direction of what I want to be, or how I want to live my day, or my routine. If you just look at your daily routine, you can start to identify what you actually want to do.
Yeah.
So if it's, I'm getting up to do operations and I'm not getting to go to the gym or do this thing, or I can't really travel because of X, what is it that you want? And then you can kind of craft what fits into those things. Do I want to be the daily operator? If so, then yeah, maybe you should learn it and study and listen to all these podcasts and books and find mentorship and all of those things that would help you be a better version of yourself in that department, if that's what you want. You're in a fortunate situation where I think people would beg to be in that situation where you can decide that. I think when you get that choice, it's up to you to say, this fits my lifestyle or it doesn't. This is the big shift for me, was saying no to a lot of things that don't fit what I want to design my life like, not necessarily my business anymore. It's a fortunate position to be in to do that. So when you get there, you get to step back and like look at yourself more holistically and say, this is a good fit for me. And then you can decide, I want to be like, I keep saying I want to learn Italian. Like, okay, when are you going to do it? Is that really what you want to do? And you spend all this time and effort and energy, or is like Apple going to come out with a translator that you stick in your ear? I don't know. So I think there's a point where you have to make a decision about what you want to be good at and how it affects and impacts the next chapters of what you're going to be as a human.
Yeah, that's great advice. And it leads us nicely onto this topic about I guess your pivot to thinking more about impact, and I think you said sort of moving towards lifestyle design. So you talked earlier about how I guess you were operating from a fear principle, or you're sort of running away from your past and building all the businesses and being successful, and then eventually you got to a point where you sort of changed that focus and were a bit more maybe intentional about the direction of your life. What was it that gave you that sort of new perspective on things?
That's a mixed answer, because part of it was me identifying that I wasn't being healthy, that I wasn't, that what I consider success wasn't just about business. W- So there were some early warning signs that I should have listened to more clearly when they happened. But my initial knee jerk was like, that's part of survival. So surviving well was success.
Hmm.
Very different from having balance, or what I'll call a center versus like left or right. Like this is a dimensional balancing act. So that was the first sign. I think also just my father's mortality, watching him go from like he had so many things going on to nothing, and then his life slowly started to well, not really slowly but really fastly deteriorated. So I was like, you get this mortality piece that comes into play, and also just like my own legacy. What do you want to be? Not necessarily business focused. I kind of took a step back and say, is this what you're going to be known for? Is that really what you want? And I had a great mentor say something very similar when I was in a business, probably shouldn't have been in, and in general, just didn't have a good legacy attached to it. So he said, is this what you want to be known for? Because if it is, stick with it. And I didn't really take that advice. I took it at surface level, like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to get out of this. I'll do something else. And it was making a lot of money, but whatever, I shouldn't be in that business. What do you want to be known for long term? So that was part of it. And then I think in the last couple of years, it was a balance of health and life and friendships and things that I had sacrificed for so long. I have a theory of what I see in a lot of billionaire families, not to try to model myself after it, but just to recognize these patterns. And one of the phases of those patterns for me was when they get beyond philanthropy and they get beyond, you know, all of the things they've given back to the communities and environments, and they get bored, and then they, start jumping out of airplanes and doing weird stuff, going to space. What happens after that is they invest in life extension, and you see a lot of billionaires now do that, right?
Hmm.
When they're asked why, it's to go back to the things that they had, that to have more time to give back to the things they may have sacrificed early on.
Hmm.
So it's like a full circle. So I'm like, if I could get there sooner, like,
Yeah.
could you have balance today and be successful in all of the other things? So somewhere in the center. And that's one of the areas where I've tried to focus more heavily on. And that's why, you know, I think before we started recording, I was saying you got to say no more to things that hurt.
Hmm.
And I think effectively padding yourself and the time to have balance in all of the other areas of life, whether that's your spiritualism, that's or your money, or your relationship with your family, or as a husband or a father, whatever those things are, to actually have some balance in life. And I hate to say it, I'm a Libra, so I apparently run from one end of the scale to the other end of the scale, back and forth, like, really super healthy, you know, going to party for the weekend. So it's like a constant balancing act, and I think having a little bit more centered approach has been a really big focus for me personally.
So, I mean, what does that look like? You mentioned they're saying no to things that hurt. Like in practical terms, what are you doing different now than the Jeremy of 10 years ago maybe would have done?
I want to say yes to everything because there's just so many things I want to do, but I think more and more, even travel. Like, we spent an amazing summer traveling. My wife and I went through Europe for 2 months. It was over the top. And then this year I'm like, okay, I could see our schedule already, starting to build up. And in the last month I was like, no, like, I need to, have my routine of health, and there's definitely a lot of things on the plate for work. So I want to have some balance there. That's not how I used to operate. I would say you can do all of that. Yes, we'll say yes to everything. so, um, so I see myself balancing more and slowing down in the approach of saying yes to things. Also, in general, it's easy to say no to simple things. it's really hard when it's something you really want to do. So, and more recently, having made some amazing friendships, saying no to, hey, we'd love to go travel with you guys, but we just can't.
Mm,
Just to have a little bit of space and time to not be on the go 24/7, 365. The,
mm,
5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was yes to everything all the time. so,
mm,
I think I'm just slowing down a little bit, which is helpful in making better decisions. I have very strict, if anybody asks me to do something and they're like, hey, I need a decision right now, the answer is always no. That's been something I've done for a long time, came from a really amazing mentor of mine. That was something I picked up from them when I was in my 20s. And that actually worked out really well in my favor. And now I realize, yeah, but you say yes to everything else super fast. so, so taking my time to think things through before I make the decision is definitely something I've adopted more recently.
that's great advice. That's great advice. It feels like, yeah, like you say, a lot of it's interesting how people who spend a career being successful in business do tend to go through the same pattern, don't they? Over and over again, it's the same thing. And it reminds me, there's that story of I don't know if it's true, it's some old parable from business books, very often taught and slightly modified, where the rich business person goes to the beach in the Caribbean and is out surfing, and they meet the chilled out local who's also surfing. And the chilled out local offers them some advice on surfing, and the rich business person says, oh, you should start a surf school and you could teach people how to do this and you could make some money. And they're like, why? Well, then you could build it up and you could get more coaches and you could build a thing and you could get people coming in from different islands. And before you know it, you'd have a really good business operation. And they're like, well, why? Well, then you could afford to go on holiday. It's like, well, I'm here, dude. What do I need? And it's like we go through all these gyrations to essentially find validation or happiness with our family, or things that actually end up not costing us money, but we go through this long journey to afford the things that actually are sort of right in front of us, and oftentimes we're actually sacrificing on the way to get to the money to buy the things.
It is. That's exactly. And I feel like that's where I'm at. I'm finally in a position where I can go focus on the things I wish I would have focused on before: my health, my friendships, my relationship, all of the things that should have been nurtured that I sacrificed early on. I'm now having to go back and repair. And all of the time I spent making all the money to do that, I'm spending now to repair them. It's so funny to end up back to where you started. But it's so true. And I know there's like a proverb around, you'll sacrifice your health and your well-being only to make money that you'll spend fixing your health and your well-being, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's terribly true. So now I think it's a bigger focus for me, and spreading that message to others earlier on to have some balance. It's not going to affect as many people as I'd like it to, but I wish people would listen to it so that they can enjoy their way up, not sacrifice everything and then, burn their way to the top and then turn around. It's like there's nothing back there, because it's not always there when you want it, when you get to the end result. So it was a good experience for me, but also now in designing the next years of my life in business and in friendships and in health and in wellness and all the other things, there's a place for my companies and what I'm doing and how I feel about what I'm growing, not necessarily whether they'll be profitable or not. And that's kind of the thing that I enjoy about this part of the trip. I get to design it the way I would have liked to have done it from the beginning, knowing what I know today, which is probably, 10 years from now, I'll be like, what were you thinking? Why did you do it that way? But I think it's the right path. So I've been really focused on purpose. Why are you doing it? And not necessarily looking at what is my competitor doing, or, how much money is it going to make, but is it the best version of what I can create? Am I going to enjoy it along the way?
I want to ask you about your skills and strengths, Jeremy, as we start to wrap up. Like, what would you say that you are truly world class at? Do you think?
Ideation.
Yeah.
I think in general, I see things very differently from a very different angle and perspective early on. So I wouldn't say I'm a visionary, but that I have ideas of how things can work. Doesn't matter what it is. And I think I have a really unique marketing mind.
Mm.
So, how to touch the right people in the right way to get them to understand the concept of something is something I really excel at. And I think that's part of why I can get things off the ground so quickly because I know how to approach somebody in a very unique way. And I
Mm.
also see how I can monetize a business in a very different way. It's not always successful. I
Mm.
think in general, that's a superpower that I feel like I've garnered over the years that I've put to use in practical day to day and even in consulting and advisory of friends and family and other people, peers and, you know, startup groups. I have those same kind of aha moments that most people don't necessarily see in with very little outside input. Somebody say, well,
Right.
this is an idea. I think I'm going to do this. And I'm like, well, I have an idea. Do this. And here's how you execute it. And I think this is what it'll cost you to do it. And if you put this here, and they're like, whoa, 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 didn't even think about that. And then off to the races. So I wish I could do that all day. I wish I could just sit in ideation
Yeah.
the entire day and focus on how to help people get past that hurdle. That would be fun for me. And so that's become a superpower. Also, sleep. I
Oh.
am that is I talk about this a lot. I have a superpower where I can take a nap at will for 5 minutes and it is like a reset button. It's amazing. I don't know where I picked that up or how I picked it up, but it's become a superpower for me. It has nothing to do with business.
Oh, yeah. That's amazing. That'd be very, very handy. And okay, I mean, on the first superpower, then this ideation thing, is that something that was in you and you refined? Because obviously, starting all these companies and getting product market fit, and having to take them to market and get some revenue or some sign of life, like you're doing reps on that superpower. So is it something you already had which you refined, or is this something that you've just built over time from just doing it 50 times?
I've never been asked that, so I don't know where if I've spent a lot of time. I think I just have a lot of ideas all the time. I have a list of so instead of starting them, my wife and one of my co-founders and many of the companies I've started, they stop me. They're like, "Stop, no more businesses. Like three is too many already. No more." So they're like, "Just write them down, get them out, like get it out of your system." So
Yeah.
I started doing it, and I have a notepad. If I open it up and rolled through it, you would be like, "Whoa, this is a sickness." But I think all the way through it. Like I'll write a 2-page thing on a business idea of from beginning to revenue and profitability. And then I'm like, oh, okay, it's out of my system. And
Right.
sometimes I relate back to that because somebody will say, well, I have this idea. I'm like, wait, death scroll to the bottom of this thing. Here it is. Like, I already thought of it. This is what you should do. And part of me wants to put this out online somewhere and turn it into like jeremy'scrazyideas.com because
Yeah. I was going to
I
say
feel like I want to give these things away to people that will actually do something with them. But I'm
yeah,
watching
yeah,
them happen, and sometimes I'm like, "Damn it! You've this has happened to you, right? You're like, I have this idea. If you
yeah.
did this and that, and then like 6 weeks later, you're like, yeah, some unicorn that just raised $700 billion,
That's
and the founder took 70 billion cash, and I'm like, well, that was my idea. It's on my notepad. I can show you.
it. Yeah, I'm seeing like either a sort of a production line with you furiously scribbling your ideas down, then passing them off to teams that have been built to go and execute and operate them, or some sort of website where you put your coin in, pull a lever, and out pops an idea.
So one
Lucky
of
dip.
my ideas, yeah, I'll just give it to you. I think it's
Go
part
on.
of my ideation business was dreamkillers.com. I want to help entrepreneurs not go down path with a business that's not going to work.
Oh,
And I would
yeah.
love an advisory board of people who are smart in their respective areas, and for a fee, to tell us your idea and we'll just shoot it down. I mean, it's like we'll just shoot it down for you. Now you'll probably leave angry because it's dream
Yeah.
killers or deal. That's the point of it, is to get real feedback, brutal honesty. Like that's not going to work. And some people will leave and like, I'm powering through this anyway. And those are the
Mm.
founders I'd love to invest in, because they're like mad science. Like, I don't care whether you told me I can or can't. I still believe in it.
Yeah.
Those are the people I like to invest in because they really believe it.
Yeah.
And they'll go to lengths and fight investors and say, you're wrong. I don't care if you gave me money. This is the idea. Those guys were successful. I mean, I've seen, some of these remakes of shows that, like the Uber special. I don't know if you watched that, like 4 or 5 part series.
Mm.
You watched We Work. These guys are mad scientists. Like they'll fight
Mm.
you over
Yeah.
this is their vision, not yours. And they become wildly successful. So that's one of them that I'm like, we need to do that at some point. So
Yeah.
if we'll
I,
tap you on
I've
the shoulder, we need a marketing, ninja
Yeah, I
to
I feel like that's something everybody needs. I don't know. Yeah, I feel like it should be a sort of a ritual that you have to go through before you're set free into the entrepreneurial world. Is you have to bounce your idea off the idea killers, and then then you got your gold star. Then you can go off into the world. Like you shouldn't be allowed to advertise on Google or Facebook until you've been through the idea killers.
I'm telling you, yeah. And just like to keep you out of harm's way, I see people do things. I'm like, that's you.
Yeah.
Do you know what you're doing? Have you talked to an attorney about this at all? Like, no, like you can't do that. It's illegal.
Yeah.
Well, no, somebody else is doing it, which I hear all the time. So
Mm.
yeah, but there's another company and they're crushing it. I'm like, that doesn't make it right. so, so,
Yeah.
so yeah, if you want to be on that panel, I
Love
would
it.
love to have you.
Love
No,
it. Love it.
that's part of it, is just, I would love to give people more direction, because there's a lot of landmines of BS everywhere,
Mm.
of, accelerators, even to some extent, are kind of the dream killers or dream crushers, whatever you want to call it, to help people really flesh out what they're doing before they, put their name on it and put it out to the world. It would be nice to have mentors that weren't tied to some kind of benefit,
Mm.
financial or otherwise.
Yeah.
So mentorship, I think, is key. And having somebody to mentor you, it's tough because there's so many false prophets focused on profits, like
Mm.
they're
Yeah.
not necessarily focused on the well-being of the person along the way.
That's why I started this podcast. It's nothing to sell. And yeah, most of the times you find a mentor, they want to sell you a coaching program or something, don't they? And the ones who, yeah, the ones who, like you, have been out there and doing stuff and making businesses and running and selling, like they're often too busy to mentor. And, there's no sort of structure for collecting these people as mentors. So hopefully we can do a bit of that. Jeremy, final question before I let you go to start another whole bunch of businesses or resist starting businesses. If you could do it all again, is there anything that you'd have done differently?
Yeah, I said it earlier on. I wish I would have single channel focused, and whether it was growing intrinsically inside that industry and staying really hyper focused to a path. It's not necessarily that I wish I would have done it. I just wonder what it would have been like.
Mm.
Right? I mean, when I was and it would have been amazing if I didn't also have to have a full-time job. I can't imagine a single point of focus for all of what I had in terms of energy. Like what that would have looked like. I have no idea. So it's more a curiosity than it is this is what I would have done differently. I'm just curious to like what would that have been like
Yeah.
mentally as well. I mean, I could imagine that could have gotten extremely boring and taken me down a totally different path. So other than that, no, I kind of like the path that I went down. I don't like, some of the stories along the way are tough and challenging, but that's part of the story.
Yeah. I love that. I think you're a unique guy. I don't think I've ever met anyone like you, and I hope that people watching or listening to this will embrace their own the aspects of them that aren't traditional, and they'll be as self-reflective as you have and working out what your superpowers are. I think your journey where you've started and sort of incubated and got these ideas off the ground is amazing. I don't know anyone who's sort of operated in that way before. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and sharing your stories, Jeremy. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was great to hang out, man. Hopefully we get to do this again. And you're always welcome down here in Miami, but we're coming out to see you. We're headed to the Cotswolds in the summer. So
Amazing.
I think we're coming out there in April or May.
Oh, nice. Oh yeah, it'll be lovely there. Yeah, all the flowers starting to bloom. It'll be beautiful. Yeah. Well, I'll come and see you and hang out with Messi.
Awesome.
That was the invite, right?
Yeah, sure. Let me know how we get in there.
I heard he's got quite a handy bodyguard, so yeah.
Yeah, I don't think
you go first.
Yeah.
Jeremy, thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care.